Meanwhile, let's continue to monitor this breaking news. Let's bring you analysis. Jamil Jaffer is with us, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Jamil was a former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush and formerly served on the leadership team of the Justice Department's National Security Division as counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for National Security. Exactly the sort of expertise that we need at this moment. And just your reaction thus far and how we see the response coming from what Romain has pointed out to be a relatively new leadership team, but still one that has reacted swiftly.
Yeah, Caroline, it's a great question. I mean, the real challenge here in New York is figuring out how to identify where this person is, where he's gone, and whether he's part of a larger group, right? We don't have any signs today that this is a larger terrorist incident. It appears to be a single person. He was clearly prepared for the incident, putting on a gas mask, putting out that smoke-filled container, and then starting shooting to shoot people. But that is obviously the big fear in New York City is, given all the places the subway goes, given all the locations around the city that could be attacked, is this part of a larger effort? Mayor Eric Adams did a good job getting a handle on the situation. Governor Kathy Hochul also involved, and the president now being briefed. So they're all looking at this, trying to figure out, okay, what are we dealing with here? What are the next steps for us?
Jamil, there's a broader issue here, and I'm wondering realistically how you create greater protections for transit systems, not just in New York City, but really nationwide. You get on an airplane, you go through a tremendous amount of screening, you enter certain buildings. There's all types of checks and balances to make sure that the people entering are doing so in a safe and responsible way. So far, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of reasonable way to sort of institute better security procedures that doesn't completely slow down the process of entering and exiting our transit systems.
No, you're exactly right. This is one of the biggest challenges, given the number of locations we have in a major transit system like the New York subway system. If you were to install magnetometers alone, as you point out, that would dramatically slow down the pace of getting into the stations. But it would also require the deployment of a tremendous number of magnetometers. The scope and scale of such an effort in one city alone, New York City, is hard to imagine, even going beyond that. At the same time, right, we do know that the New York City Police Department and New York City Fire is very much on point in terms of focusing on where the potential threat zones might be and going and targeting those. And so we often see patrols in the subway system and the like. And so we have to figure out a way to both, allow our people to transit the system as well as they need to, but protect our security. This may be a wake-up call that we need to do more when it comes to the subway system, not just in terms of magnetometers and metal detectors, but also, gas detection devices and gas dispersal devices to protect against, in that tightly enclosed environment, the dispersal of whether it's tear gas or whatever this person used at the time.
It's interesting that you talk about a so-called wake-up call, because for many, certainly crime incidents is not a wake-up call. It's something that the administration has been dealing with ever since they took over at the beginning of the year, 100 days in for Mayor Eric Adams, and it has really been a focus, and he's graded himself thus far incomplete when it comes to crime. He himself, of course, a former police officer. What else is needed? We heard, of course, from who is still, we know, like a relatively new police commissioner as well, talking about how our police need more help. So said Commissioner Sewell. Is it about more help? Is it about more boots on the ground? What is it about?
Well, part of it is a matter of having the right number and quantity of police officers, vehicles, but it's also about training. It's about preparedness. Look, New York City police officers, no matter how many there are, can't be everywhere at all times. So we got to be able to assess threats, be able to take action on them, be prepared for them, and have the force posture, yes, necessary to do that. We've been going through a time in our country over the last few years where we've been debating, right, what the size and structure and nature of police forces ought to be. And at times, these larger mass casualty events, which hopefully this doesn't turn into any more of a mass casualty event than it already is, with 5 critically injured, right, they do tend to wake us up to the threats that we face and the crime challenges that we face, whether they're terrorist attacks or just standard criminality. And that does require more equipment, more training, more police officers, and the like.
How much of this needs to be coordinated at the federal level, or do we leave this to local and state authorities?
This is another complicated challenge. When it comes to terrorism, we've generally thought that federal officials need to coordinate it and take a very direct role in it. When it comes to these criminal events, we don't know what this was, but it looks more like a criminal event than a terrorist event, at least at this time. And those lines are blurring too. We do tend to believe that the localities ought to take responsibility for it and have the ownership over it. But at all times, the threat matrix is something that the federal government has a good handle on, working with states and localities. And the New York City Police Department is the best in the country of local police departments that have an intelligence capability and that operate at a lot of levels like a federal agency would because of the threats they face and the size of their force in the city.
All right, Jamil, I really appreciate you taking time to be with us. Jamil Jaffer there. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University out there in Virginia.